Thank you very much for joining us at the ONI Veeam webinar. It's a best practice on both backup and disaster recovery. I hope it's a session that you'll enjoy. What I'm going to do now is just run through the running order of the day. What we're going to be doing is just having a very, very brief overview of ONI as an organisation and that of Veeam also. Then what we'll be doing, we're going to having a technical deep dive session, looking at a number of scenarios and a number of deployment options, utilising the services of an MSP and, of course, the Veeam software. Later on in the webinar, we'll be taking a good look at what's new with Veeam and what we can look forward to in the future. What I will do now, though, is just introduce you briefly to the team. I'm joined by my colleague, Richard Stone, who's the Cloud Compute Storage lead here at ONI.
Good afternoon.
I'm also joined from Veeam by Mike Tonks, who's the hosting manager for cloud, both UK and Ireland, over there at Veeam.
Hello, everyone. Pleased to meet you.
And joining us also as our specialist, we've got Nikolai Stankovic, who's the senior systems engineer over there at Veeam, and he will be joining us for the Q&A session closer to the end of the webinar, and there to answer some of your more probing sort of questions. I'm also there. We've got Debbie Cottrell. She's a part of our marketing team here at ONI.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Right, okay, let's get on with the afternoon. I'm Paul Cook. I'm a business developer with ONI. I've been working in the cloud backup and disaster recovery market for probably the last 15 or so years. Before that, I've spent collectively maybe 30 years dealing with corporate accounts and managing corporate accounts within the industry. Let's take a good look at ONI, shall we? ONI started in 1992, and some of you more of my sort of vintage would remember it. Shakespeare's Sister was topping the charts back then, so that's quite some time ago. But very, very quickly, ONI established itself very, very much for its core competencies, certainly within Cisco, and very much established itself as a very, very serious systems integrator at the time. Enjoyed a wonderful period, both gaining the Cisco gold standard and becoming a gold partner, and won a number of prestigious sort of contracts along the way. But as all companies do evolve, there's a real landmark point for me, excuse me, there's a real landmark point for me, which is in 2011, when our timeline really separates into our before cloud and then our after cloud. And that's the commissioning of our data center. Our data center based in Luton is a genuine tier 3 data center with tons of tier 4 sort of attributes. So it's a wonderful facility. And whilst giving us a very, very great opportunity for co-location, it also became the home for our own private cloud offering, which we lovingly call Nimbus. I say that all organizations evolve, and certainly MSPs are no different. Our focus now, or how we would describe ourselves, is certainly as a solutions provider, both managing and deploying very converged technologies, both on-prem and in the cloud. Now, if you're going to be looking after any sort of cloud service or delivering any cloud service, there's a whole number of priorities that need to be considered, not least, of course, things like security and flexibility and what have you. But for me, one of the very key things absolutely has to be the availability of that service. There's no point having a great service if there's problems with the availability. People talk about 4 nines, 5 nines. That's just simply not good enough as far as ONI is concerned. and we live and die by the fact that we have what we call our business assured guarantee of 100% uptime. That is a service credit guarantee, but it's a wonderful guarantee from my point of view as an account manager and business developer, because I've never had to pay out on it, and we have no intention of ever paying out on it, because we have no intention of letting our wonderful record of something like 9 years worth of continuous uptime fall down, which is a brilliant opportunity now to bring in Richard, who was one of the core architects as far as our Nimbus platform was concerned. So over to you, Richard.
Many thanks, Paul, for that lovely introduction. So yeah, my name's Richard Stone. I've been at ONI for almost 7 years now. And the reason I was brought into ONI was very much in that post-cloud era that Paul just talked about. And we've just built the data center, and I was brought in to help build out the managed services that I helped to build within ONI. So my responsibility at ONI is the compute, storage and business continuity lead. And as part of that, I architected the IaaS service, the infrastructure as a service, the backup as a service, the DR as a service, and worked very, very closely with our security teams and connectivity teams to bring the services together. And of course, we work with an awful lot of wonderful partners, very many of those VMware, NetApp, but Veeam being a very, very great part of what we do. And over to you, Mike, to introduce Veeam.
Hi guys, yeah, as I said at the beginning of the call, my name's Mike Tonks. I'm the UKI hosting manager for Veeam software. What does that mean is that with my colleagues, I manage many hundreds of service providers throughout the United Kingdom, which is absolutely brilliant for me as we move more towards a services based organisation and a reoccurring type revenue type company. Veeam, like everyone, is trying to do that. A few stats for those that may not be aware of Veeam. We've got one of the Gartner slides up. Now, Gartner we've been consistently for the last 4 years been a leader in the Gartner quadrant. Last year was a great time for Veeam in fact, this beginning of this year, in the fact that we are now the #1 in the leaders quadrant with Gartner. So that's absolutely brilliant for us. So if you adhere to Gartner, then Veeam are very referenceable there. I think there's some key stats down here. We've got 82% of the Fortune 500 companies in the client pool, either using us for point solutions or throughout the whole entire enterprise, via a service provider or directly. We have 375,000 customers worldwide. But I suppose the thing that we're most proud of is a Net Promoter Score of 75. Now, a Net Promoter Score is Veeam giving our customers the opportunity to judge us out of 100 on what we do, not just in terms of the product, how they're working with, how the channel is, the salespeople and the technical people that they're dealing with, and we're 3 times higher than the average. That puts us on the same sort of pedestal as people like Apple and those type of companies. And Veeam are extremely proud of the Net Promoter Score that we have. It's worth mentioning what's been a very different year for everyone, in 2020. So we put this slide in here to show what we're seeing in service providers. As I say, I speak to many service providers, and I can't go throughout 2020 without mentioning the C word. We've all encountered it. I haven't been into the office since February. I haven't been able to see my clients since March. That isn't likely to change soon. So COVID is having an absolutely massive effect on how you're all deploying your IT, how you may be looking at using service providers. It may be very different to what you were thinking about 9-10 months ago. Second point, resource management. We all know that budgets are shrinking and you're trying to do more. That's not changing, and it's not likely to change soon. So many of the people on the call may be looking at service providers to reduce those costs, see what they can do. Security and governance is an interesting one. Up until recently, it was always the #1 area that people are looking at. Now, I know that we've only got one area of security and governance mentioned on here, which is cyber threats, which are increasingly happening all over the place at the moment. And it's not a case of if, it's a case of when cyber threats will occur. But security and governance is still up there. Finally, digital transformation. We always talk about technology. We never talk about people. Now, I'm blessed in my job in working with some very clever people in service providers. And the one thing that I would say is that it's, until you've had to invoke DR, or you've had to restore a backup, or you've lost a data center, if you're not doing that every day, and most IT guys get to encounter a disaster, every, maybe twice, 3 times in a lifetime of IT. This is absolutely key with on the people side of things. And that's one thing that I want to mention, the people involved in service providers and the knowledge that they have.
Mike, if I can, just before we move on, I'm interested in just talking to you about the security and governance sort of figure that you've got there. You talk about it being historically always there as the number one thing that people are talking about or having as a focus. And that's clearly not the case just at this minute in time. Could you explain that figure a little bit more for me?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we've only got one thing to do with security and governance here, which is with cyber threats. I think that perhaps what is happening, many of what's happening with COVID and where that budget is going, may be hidden under the COVID umbrella. I mean, is that something that you can touch on, Richard, in terms of what you're seeing as well?
Absolutely. Security and governance, it covers many areas, not just cyber. And under COVID, you're looking at people working from home, and that security perimeter of your clients are not working all in the office anymore, where you can really control security. They're now out and about more than they've ever been. So you've got many more attack vectors and the like. So I would very much anticipate that 66% of COVID and the issues around it will probably be a large part of that would be security and governance related. So it's absolutely key that any service provider that you work with regards to these technologies can help you across the entire security and governance stack, and not just security and governance with particular applications such as Veeam, backup and disaster recovery. Same goes with digital transformation. Digital transformation is being kickstarted very much so by COVID, and I'm sure you're seeing that with Veeam, a huge uptake of services because of COVID.
Okay, thank you. Right, well, now we move to the main part of the webinar, which is our roundtable or panel sort of conversation. What we're going to be doing is exploring 3 scenarios. These are real life scenarios, in fact, and looking at maybe the solutions that we could respond with. What I'd like to sort of do at this point, though, is encourage those members of the audience to send in your questions. If you've got one that we can deal with immediately, that's pertinent to the point in time that we're at, we'll try and deal with that. If not, we'll deal with the questions at the end. What we also will do, if there are a lot of questions and we can't deal with them all in the time, we will publish those sort of questions and come back to you with a response at a later stage. But please feel free to send them in at any time. Thank you. Right, let's get on with this and look at scenario 1. Okay, well, scenario 1 is a law firm, very, very large law firm. To date, their entire environment has been on-prem, but times are changing. A number of sort of priorities have changed, not least recently with the COVID pandemic and what have you. And now considering seriously their cloud options, very much looking at 365. Amongst their concerns, though, is security within that solution, privacy within that solution, and of course its availability. All right. So they're very much looking for the cloud, have no real preference at this moment whether or not that would be a hybrid cloud or a private cloud or public cloud. So over to you, Richard.
Absolutely. So Veeam is incredibly flexible in this scenario, but it's not just the software that we need to consider at this point. You need to work with a service provider that can not only deploy the software in order to help you utilize those services, but holistically look at your application base and decide the right workload in the right place. You need to have a service provider that not only does Azure, not only does private cloud or on-premises managed services as well, that does all of those things, that they don't push you down any one preference. They do the right preference for your business, the right solution for your business, and that's absolutely key. So what I have on the screen is a large part of the flexibility that Veeam brings to this space. So absolutely, if the customer is looking at Office 365, Veeam is one of the most mature Office 365 backup services available. And you can implement it so that it backs up to a service provider, as I have shown here on the screen, but it can actually be implemented so it can back up onto the customer site, and indeed it can back up into Azure as well. But up into Azure, I wouldn't see as best practice with Office 365, which we'll touch on later. I've also shown here a cloud at the top which depicts Azure and some IaaS VMs. So if you're migrating and putting services into VMs up in Azure, Veeam has the capability of deploying backup and replication directly out of the marketplace. You can deploy that up there, and then that will allow you to back up to a private cloud or on-premises, or indeed use Veeam Cloud Connect. If you use Veeam Cloud Connect from there, you get the ability to use the WAN accelerator and offsite those backups out of Azure. And obviously you also have the ability to use the full suite of browsers of restore solutions, which are your Veeam Explorers for Exchange, Veeam Explorer for SQL, Veeam Explorer for Active Directory, for example. So it's incredibly flexible, incredibly full-featured.
Yeah, okay. And I'd like to add a few words here, if you don't mind. So one of the best things about this platform is that it's going to be a same solution that will be capable of helping you with any types of workload. So you won't need to care and worry about different products, different solutions to cover all types of workloads that you have right now or you're planning to have in the future. So that's really good that you can use the same set of technologies even in the future, not worrying about purchasing something else. Yeah, and talking about those explorers that Richard mentioned, I'd like to elaborate on that just a bit, because for sure you can restore, you can cope with the whole virtual machines, services, applications, but when it comes to explorers, they give you the ability to restore single application items like mailboxes, like ledgers, like users and computers from Active Directory and group policy objects, integrated DNS records, literally anything like you could imagine, and that saves tons of time. That's the real flexibility.
Thank you for that, Nikolai. Richard, there's a couple of questions that I've just got for you, though, and maybe, Nikolai, if you want to take one of those in a moment. But I'm just aware that we just use terms like Veeam Cloud Connect, like everybody knows about it. Can one of you just explain exactly what Veeam Cloud Connect actually is so everybody knows?
Absolutely. Veeam Cloud Connect is effectively a cloud-based backup repository that attaches directly into your Veeam backup and replication service. So you can go add repository, cloud repository, and it's there. So a service provider can give you just a unique URL and a username and password, and it attaches directly into your Veeam console. And a service provider can provide you that space, and that space can be either in a service provider's own data center, or it can be up in Azure.
Okay. Another question for you. So we're backing up O365 again here. I talk to customers all the time when I'm trying to talk to them about 365 and backing up their data, and they say, don't need to, Paul. Absolutely don't need to. I've got the recycle bin. I can restore from there. There's absolutely no point in backing up my 365. But there it is. We've got it. Just tell me, why should they be doing this?
It's a really interesting point, and I actually see this a lot within the customer base. And you absolutely do. Although Office 365 is an absolutely phenomenal product, it is software as a service, and it's a highly available software as a service, but the data within it is absolutely your corporate data. And am I right in saying, Mike, that Microsoft actually ask you to protect the data within it and actually recommend using a third-party product?
Absolutely. So I think if you look at the Microsoft licensing agreement, their ELA, they say please use a third party to back up Microsoft data, Office 365 data. So if Microsoft are telling you to do one with the product that you bought, then you should definitely listen. So it's if you lose data, it's not because Microsoft haven't told you to use a third party product to back up Office 365.
Absolutely. If you could go to the next slide, please, Paul. I've prepared an example of what Microsoft actually does protect and how it protects it. So your inbox data, you can see, is kept for 2 years. So if you don't touch anything for 2 years, it's there, and it's moved to an archive. But it's more the areas that are more critical from a deletion perspective are the deleted items. So if you put anything in your recycle bin, so that's important because if you've got a disgruntled or an employee that's going through a disciplinary, for example, they will hide their trace. They will delete things, and therefore after 1 month you've lost that audit trail. But junk emails, if you've received something that's gone into junk incorrectly, after 2 weeks that's disappeared permanently. But then you've also got a more key one: an employee leaves the company, and that's a normal standard leavers process from an organization would be somebody would leave, it would trigger a leavers process, and as part of that, IT will delete the user's Active Directory account, but also delete their O365 subscription account, so they stop paying for it. An interesting example I've had in the past was a company, an FD at a company left the business, but unknown to the business, the FD was using the mailbox that he had to store all of the contract information that he'd been putting in place with various third parties for years. And he left, and inadvertently all that contract data was gone because they didn't have a backup. So it's absolutely critical to apply a backup of some sort, and Veeam is an absolutely phenomenal one for 365.
Should we move on to the next scenario? And thank you very much indeed. Okay, now we're into the world of manufacturing. Some very, very large business consuming a large amount of Azure, both in their production environment and in their DR environment also. Their intention is to fully continue consuming Azure. However, in light of one or two sort of recent sort of events, a couple of them fairly public, where we've looked at some Azure outages, they've been asked some questions and they need to come up with some answers now. My client needs to come up with some answers. Looking at ways now whereby they might continue on that Azure journey and consuming Azure, but how they may actually mitigate their risk some more as far as their DR is concerned.
Right, absolutely. Veeam is incredibly flexible in this space in order to help with this type of scenario. I've shown on the screen here that a customer was using production in Azure, top left on the screen, and the top right, I'm assuming they were using something like Azure Site Recover to protect their workloads to another availability zone within Azure. The Veeam services can either be layered across that, so you continue paying for that, depending on your appetite to increase spend, or you can stop paying for that and layer Veeam services on using those funds. So there's options here. You can use that Azure-based Veeam backup and replication server that you can deploy off the marketplace, and you can then protect your workloads using Veeam Cloud Connect out to a service provider, or indeed to on-premises within your organization. Or you can actually install agents on your IaaS machines and use the Veeam backup and replication server from your on-premises or cloud provider and back them up as bare metal agent servers. And there's other options. So if you're using backup and replication and you're backing up to a cloud provider, you have those virtual machine backups in a backup repository. You can actually create hot standbys from those backups and create sort of DR protected, ready to invoke machines as well from those backup copies. So it's very flexible, and there's certainly alternatives.
I wonder whether Mike's got anything to add to that.
In terms of backing up to Azure, yeah, we obviously the reason that it's so useful is the fact that there have been a couple of instances of Azure being down, certainly in the UK recently, and we have seen a move of a lot of tenants to service providers who do offer this split functionality, keeping a copy in Azure, keeping a copy outside of Azure. So just be aware, like anything else, Azure, AWS, they all go down. And this is one way of, if we go to the point, is mitigating risk.
Absolutely. And something to appreciate as well is there's a great industry rule out there, which is called the 3-2-1 rule, which is 3 copies of your data across 2 media types and 1 offsite. Although having your data across 2 Azure clouds is quite redundant in the fact that you have 2, but the types of media are the same in both Azure clouds. So you're not actually adhering to that rule. But if you're using a Veeam Cloud Connect, either on premises or in a private cloud, you've secured a copy of your data outside of the Azure realm, and you're much more less likely then to be compromised by something like ransomware, which could compromise all of your Azure data simultaneously.
Great point, Richard.
Okay, let's move on to our third and final scenario. Okay, here is a very large finance firm, and again, we're in a situation whereby they've got a lot of on-premise sort of infrastructure. They're very, very self-sufficient as a business. Their key priority over everything that we talk about is absolutely security and compliance. Security and compliance. They're in a situation where their DR platform is pretty much aging out, and they're going to be facing a very large CapEx refresh on that infrastructure. So, looking for options. One of those options that they'd like to consider, is a cloud option. All right, not quite sure what that looks like, but again, they have a number of concerns all around that compliance, and that's where this needs to be very, very strong and very, very well considered in any solution that we propose.
Absolutely. So Veeam, again, is incredibly flexible in this space, and this diagram would be incredibly messy if I'd put all of the options available. So what I've done here is I've drawn out customer site A, which is the production workload, which is relatively new and not end of life. But customer site B is where they used to have their DR infrastructure that's aged out. So obviously the customer did have the option to buy new CapEx, put that install there and carry on running as they were. However, that's a large CapEx spend. Of course, the service provider could provide an option there to actually provide that hardware on behalf of the customer, and the service provider own it and provide it as an OpEx-based service. And we do that for some customers. Some customers are that security conscious, and that this is quite often like people like MOD and some financial organizations that can't put their data even in a multi-tenanted private cloud, and certainly not the public cloud. But the vast majority of people, the right solution will either be public cloud or private cloud to convert it to an OpEx-based service. In some cases, just for the cost of the hardware maintenance and the software maintenance that they were paying for their original solution, can get the whole managed service for backup and DR for that same sort of price. And what that can deliver is Veeam Cloud Connect backup, so offsiting your backups to that disk-based repository that we were talking about, but also Veeam Cloud Connect DR to provide full hot standby VMs with a service level SLA'd recovery time objective to get that machine up and running in the event of need, in the hour of need.
Okay. You talk about what you're doing there in Site B, Richard, and you talk about that becoming a managed service, but with equipment that we own. Explain how that works for them.
Absolutely. So so it could be that ONI purchase and deploy the hardware, and we OPEX it to the customer. So we devalue it over the term of the contract and charge for it monthly, along with the actual backup and DR service rolled into that. So the whole thing can be consumed just like a cloud service, except it's dedicated in your own private cloud, as it were, rather than a multi-tenanted cloud in a private data center of a managed service provider or up in Azure.
Okay. You brought up multi-tenancy, not me, but I have a question for you on it. People, when I'm talking to them about multi-tenanted sort of environments, sometimes get the jitters, especially if they're new to the cloud, saying it's a multi-tenanted environment. How secure can that be?
It's incredibly secure. I mean, those cloud gateways are effectively firewalls, and they secure access from each of your own Veeam backup and replication servers on a one-to-one basis with the cloud service provider's URL and a unique username and password. And the backup repositories themselves, the storage arrays behind it, the backup repositories are unique to each customer. So the data is not shared. They're sharing the same hardware, but they're in separate volumes effectively in the storage. So the data is completely segregated, and the access to it is completely segregated, and it's very secure.
Okay. One more question that I've got on this one, and that is around the whole DR. Well, possibly a couple of questions around the DR scenario. One is about latency, and the other one is around the recovery time. We're in a situation here where there's a lot of data up in the cloud. Is it going to take ages for them to get a restoration done? Is the latency going to be too much of a problem for them? Talk to me about that.
Absolutely, it's a great question, and you have to actually consider backup and DR as two separate scenarios here. So let's tackle DR first, because DR it's a completely different use case. Because what DR is, you keep hot standbys of your VMs in the cloud data center. So be that Azure, or be that the managed service provider's data center, or indeed customer site, depending if you're doing it that way. But you've got a complete standby VM, and you're trickling the data across. The data changes every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes, depending on how often you do the snapshots and the replication changes. But you're keeping that full hot standby VM. So in the event of a disaster, the data is already at the cloud service provider. So there is nothing to copy at that point. You just power it on, and the time it takes to power on is how long it takes to recover. So from that perspective, there is no latency if it's in Azure, private cloud, or Site B. But let's talk about backup. Now, this is a different story, because backup, you want to normally restore your data back to the original location. So if you're pulling from Azure, there's two things here. It's the pipe size and latency. So you've got how long it takes to pull out, depending on how fat your pipe is. But more critically, from Azure, you've got egress charges. So that's something to consider if you're using a public cloud service. But if you're using a private cloud service, some managed service providers do charge egress charges. So that's something to check, but some don't. So it can be a benefit from a service provider that doesn't, but you still obviously have to worry about the pipe size. So how quick it takes to come down, because you might be restoring a few K, or you might be restoring an entire VM, which is several terabytes. So depending on how fat your pipe is, that could take quite some time.
Looking at this solution, certainly in that backup and DR environment, we've got potentially an opportunity for a genuine sort of hybrid sort of situation with maybe some local only, on the customer B site.
Absolutely that, and that's something that we do quite regularly as well. So you don't necessarily have to have all of the service pushing to one place as well. So the customer may have customer site A live with a copy of the backup data at site A as well. They might have the DR site at site B, but also a copy of your backup data there. But then they might also push a Veeam Cloud Connect either out to Azure or the private cloud as well. So absolutely, multi-cloud is definitely a possible solution as well.
I wonder, have the Veeam guys got any comments on this? Mike?
Well, I think the key thing is if we go back to what Richard said at the beginning, is this is a play that end users are running now in the increasing move to service providers. They're seeing that the cost of the kit, the cost of the maintenance on that kit, the cost of administering the kit, the links, everything else is more than taking a service where, you know, everything is already built into it. And the point I made at the beginning of the call was the people involved in you know, when a disaster occurs. So it's never just a case of what the cost of the kit is. And the stickiest tenants to any service provider, let me tell you, is those tenants that have had to invoke DR and the service providers brought them up correctly. You do not get a stickier tenant in any environment than someone who's had to invoke DR and the service provider's done it and saved the bacon.
Absolutely. You've got to understand that the service provider is not going through the disaster. The end client is going through the disaster, and it's a lot easier for us in a service provider setting to keep a level head and bring that customer up within their recovery time objective, because we're not in that situation. Being in that situation is so different than being a third party to it.
Awesome. Right. Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen. Now we're at where we sort of hand over really from the ONI sort of side over to the Veeam guys to tell us what's new with Veeam.
Can I actually just ask one question that's come in on the chat board?
Sure.
That's come in regarding Office 365, and I'd like to put it to Nikolai and Mike. The question is for Mark Sanders, and how can Veeam help with the identity plane in Office 365, i.e. Azure AD and on-prem AD identities, and recover and the recovery of them? Does that make sense? I'll say that again. How can Veeam help with the identity plane in Office 365, i.e. Azure AD and on-prem AD identities and the recovery of them?
Actually, in pretty easy way, because I think that's more question to me, because it's pretty technical here. When it comes to on-prem Active Directory users, computers, that can be easily protected no matter how AD is deployed, if it's virtual, if it's being virtualized, or if it's physical. That can be easily kept protected by backup application. And as we already mentioned, we have so-called explorers that can easily help not only to restore the whole AD back, but to restore something in particular from inside of this Active Directory, whether it's organization unit, some sort of a container, security group, even if you have integrated DNS records, even DNS records, etc. So if AD from Microsoft, from Azure, is synced to your on-prem, pretty much that's it. You can do whatever you like, even through your on-premises ones. And when it comes to Office 365 itself, our solution is intended to help you to cope with Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, OneDrive, and Teams at the same time through the same UI. So, as I already mentioned before, with Veeam solutions, actually you can achieve pretty much everything.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nikolai. Sorry, Paul, do you want to continue?
Yeah, well, I think we should be there ready for Mike now for again, what's new with Veeam. If Mike is still with us.
Yes, on the slide is a bit delay on the slide there. So I think when we say new, VBR version 10 has been around since the beginning of the year now, and anyone that's used VMware knows what Photon OS is. It's a hardened Linux, and I've no doubt that Nikolai or Richard can expand on that. There's NAS backup for Azure. That's been asked for a while, and we've delivered it. And finally, direct restore to Azure has been improved. It will be improved again, hopefully by Q4, Q1 of next year. There's going to be an Azure version 2 coming out. I never volunteer timelines when Veeam is going to do this, because I, you know, as a salesman, I always err on the side of optimism. But I think the key thing that for us is how service providers are using object storage to reduce costs of services to end users and tenants. And one of the ones that we mentioned before was Office 365. Office 365 in the UK market with the service providers that I'm working with, it is a long-term retention service. So you're looking 2, 3, 4 years is the average that people want to retain Office 365 data for compliances. There are various different compliances for the tenants that are involved, and that may go up, they may go down. But the way that object storage works enables that to be done at very low cost with a service provider rather than an end user themselves investing in that object storage. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Richard or Nikolai.
Absolutely. So for me, the Photon OS support was fantastic from my perspective and for our customers' perspective, because that allows us to do application consistent backups of things like your vCenter server appliance. Whereas before you could back them up as a VM, but they were just crash consistent rather than application consistent. So that's far better. And the object storage piece has been great for us because we can now scale out and therefore lower our cost of that storage to our customers. But not only that, object storage now is supporting various additional features. So to allow you to do maybe immutability, for example, which is a great feature that's come out with object storage support. And immutability is a feature that Veeam, along with working with 2 or 3, I think it's about 3 hardware vendors now, to be able to put effectively write once backups in place, but software defined as well from Veeam. So you can actually put a life on that. So you want something to be immutable for maybe 3 years, and then after 3 years, free up that space so you can start using it for something else, effectively making your backups ransomware immune, which is a great feature.
Not only ransomware immune, but immune pretty much to everything, whether it's sort of, intruder, hacker, or even malicious insider. So it helps to protect that data from pretty much everything. And that's the best thing about it.
Great point, Nikolai.
So the next one that we've got here is Office 365 version 5. Again, this is an imminent release. As I said, I never volunteer the dates that this is coming out. Anyone that's running Office 365 version 4 with Veeam knows that we support SharePoint Online, Exchange Online, and OneDrive. Yeah. So in some ways we do protect Teams, but not via the Explorer. And I'll let the technical guys talk more on that. With the one thing I will mention is during COVID, this release is absolutely critical, because what we've seen is 30.6 million over the course of 3 months of adopted Teams. And the way that Veeam backs up this unstructured data with Teams, which I'm sure the more technical on the call will touch on, is absolutely becoming a tier 1 app. How quickly has that happened is just amazing that Teams is so reliant on. I mean, I can't, the amount of Teams calls that I have now with my clients, my colleagues, etc., is fine. And the Explorer is the thing that we're going to be releasing in V5. Is there anything else you want to add to that, Richard or Nikolai?
Absolutely, I'd very much like to. It's a feature that I'm very much looking forward to because Teams with V4, you can back up the items stored in Teams because they're stored in SharePoint, so you can protect the items, but you can only recover the items. Whereas with a full Teams support and full Teams backup, you mentioned the Explorer, you can actually back up the chat as well and the groups, and you can browse it in the same way that you have it in your client, so you can actually see all the chats and the items embedded, and you can actually see who said what and when, and you can browse it in that way and restore it in that way, which is so much vastly improved over what's currently in V4. So I'm really looking forward to that feature.
True,
Nikolai?
absolutely agree here. And to say more, Explorer helps to significantly improve simplicity of the restore operations. Richard, you were absolutely right that to a certain extent we've been protecting teams even before that, but it was not hard, but pretty challenging sometimes to restore the data in the way how we used to work with that data. And Teams Explorer that we'll see in version 5, it will give these capabilities to us. Simplified restore, that's the chat. That's what I want to restore. Right click, there you go. And you have it back up and running. That's nice.
Absolutely.
The next release that Veeam have got coming again, you know, with I think we're looking at Q4, Q1. Nikolai may know more than me about this. Is continuous data protection in our version 11 of the product. We also have a Veeam Live event next week. So if anyone wants to have a look on what is available with continuous data protection in V11, please attend the Veeam Live event as well. But see, from my perspective, if you think of Sky Plus for your applications, that's exactly what it does. It rewinds applications to the millisecond. I think the key thing here is that if you have a tenant, if you're a tenant and you have 100 VMs, you may see 10 of those as mission critical, and your RPOs and RTOs need to be within 5 minutes. The rest of those applications, those 90 other applications that you've got, it may be okay for those to be recovered within 6 hours to 24 hours. So, but you can be very picky and very dynamic in how you alter what applications with a service provider get what level of RPO and RTO with continuous data protection. Is there anything else you want to add to that, Richard, Nikolai?
Absolutely, totally. I'm so looking forward to this feature, and unfortunately, it had been actually advertising this feature coming out for a very long time, but it's looking like it really is going to come out in version 11 fairly shortly now. But the reason I'm looking forward to this so much is a lot of my customers are already doing continuous data protection on a portion of their estate, but they're not using Veeam to do it. They're paying for Veeam because they're backing all the servers up, including the ones that they want to protect for CDP, but they're using a third-party product in order to provide the CDP. So what this release will do is remove the requirement to buy another product and manage another product through a different application and console. So you're going to reduce the operational time from a IT department perspective, but you're also going to make it more simple and having everything under one application. So absolutely looking forward to that.
And the other is the expanded instant recovery. So back in the day, we offered an instant recovery of VMs, which the guys can again expand on. We now offer the same instant recovery for things like Microsoft SQL, Oracle, and NAS. And instant recovery, it may be worth, Richard, Nikolai, touching on what we mean by instant recovery.
Absolutely. So instant recovery was a feature that came out probably about 8 years ago now for VM. And at the time when instant VM recovery came out, I was absolutely blown away by it. It was similar to that feeling when you first saw vMotion for the very first time. And I'll just recap exactly what it is. It was the ability to fire up a VM directly from your backup files stored on your backup storage. It basically presented an NFS directly from the backup to your ESX host or Hyper-V server. I think it was just VMware at the time, but it's both now. Yeah. But what this release is going to do is going to actually allow you to do that same fantastic instant recovery from your databases and your NAS shares. So you can actually restore directly from the backup with no restoration time. So it comes up immediately, and there's no time then to actually restore it back to the original location, because once it's up, you can actually use the vMotion capability from VMware to push it back to the original storage, assuming the hardware is okay. I mean, it could be that you've lost your primary SAN. You fire up your backups. Once the hardware has been replaced and rectified, you can bring it back using VMware with no more downtime. Or it could be that the server's blue screened, or for example, and in that instance, you can fire up immediately, have the application running for the customers, and then bring it back to the live storage with no further downtime. So yeah, that's a fantastic feature that's coming too.
I wonder if Nikolai has anything to add on that.
Actually, just a few tiny words because Richard described everything in a really nice and straightforward way. Yeah, the only thing I'd like to mention is that you can imagine usually when it comes to NAS devices, that's some sort of a physical box that's, that's located somewhere in the rack or under the table. Sometimes even that happens. But that's physical device. And with new expanded instance recovery, you'd be able to have it up and running in a matter of seconds.
Yeah.
Less than minutes, 7 seconds, working, not having that nest, you've lost it, but you have a backup somewhere created by Veeam, and this backup can be instantly spinned up. That's huge. That saves lots of time.
It's awesome.
Well, super point. Well, I think that was a perfect end, Nikolai, so thank you for that. And now we've moved to that time when we move to some of the questions that have come on in. Richard, I'm hoping you're sat on a list.
I do have some more, absolutely. So what I have here is a question from Robert. Recently, we were trying to restore one of our databases with our current backup tool and haven't succeeded. So now we don't really trust it 100%. Would it be the same with Veeam? It's an interesting one considering what we were just talking about. Do you want to take that one on, Nikolai?
Yeah, okay, so I'd be glad to answer that question. Actually, I have to say that I'm hearing pretty much the same question from time to time from our customers, because these days, lots of the customers, they are worried about the recoverability. Sometimes they are facing big challenges and problems with their current solutions. But the short answer to this question is no. It won't be the same with Veeam. Absolutely not. Because for many years, we have a set of really nice and powerful technologies capable of helping you verify, being sure that the data can be restored. Because when it comes to most of the solutions available on the market these days, how they make you know that everything is okay, they're sending you sort of a notification, hey, backup was created. But what's inside of that backup, you do not know till you'll need to restore something. Yeah, there are two ways how to do that. Either you'll face sort of a problem failure when you actually need to bring that data back, and you're finding out that everything is screwed there inside. That happens because you never know. Bad blocks on storage devices, some problems when the data is being transmitted through network. You never know. Or maybe the database inside of a production VM during the last iteration of a backup job was already dead. And inside of a backup, what do you get? Pretty much nothing, actually, when you restore that. Or the second situation, you'll be, trying to see if inside of a backup everything is okay manually, monthly, weekly, or daily, trying to verify that spending time of your IT department, spending time of your employees, wasting your resources that you spend for some other really good things like new projects, or I don't know. But with Veeam, specifically saying, let's name that technology, we have technology that's called Sure Backup. Yeah, that can automatically verify the recoverability for backups. So, do you remember what we talked about instant recovery technology that's capable of spinning up VMs directly from backup files? Yeah? That's a bit similar to this technology, but what your backup will do on scheduled basis, weekly, daily, monthly, or even after each and every new restore point we created, we can create sort of an isolated environment called data labs for you that's completely isolated from real production, but at the same time you don't need to buy any new hardware or any new CPU memory or storage, because we'll use what exactly is there. Storage was taken as a storage for this use for backups. Don't worry about that. And we'll spin up those VMs in nice isolated environment. Not only, I know, 1 or 2 VMs, but we can verify the whole set of services you have in your production, your infrastructure. We'll boot those VM up. We'll measure time needed to boot an operating system. We'll start all the services inside an application and we'll call them. We'll ask, hey, SQL, are you working or not? If everything is okay for you, yes, answer SQL. And as a result, we'll give you not a notification. For sure, that can be just a notification, but with the help of, let's say, Veeam, you can get really nice reports with all the details and all the verifications. And that's how Veeam makes things different.
Fantastic.
Brilliant.
So a full lab to be able to verify that your backups are working with a scheduled report that comes out the back of that to guarantee that your backups have worked every single time you've run it. Fantastic.
Actual
Absolutely
simulation, and that's fully automated.
Yep. Another question here. So what is backup from storage snapshots? That was from Mark H.
I think that's another question for me
So,
as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But we're running low on time, so
Okay.
can we make it fairly quick? We've got another one after this as well.
Yeah, definitely. I'll try to do my best, but I always like to talk too much about our technologies and our product. I'm a Veeam's fan. That's why. Actually, I assume again it was about Veeam really nicely. Veeam backup from storage snapshots. That's a technology specifically designed to help our vSphere customers to reduce the pressure taken by storage production infrastructure during backups. Because we all know that during a backup, backup system will try to read data as fast as possible. Yeah, that's the first thing. Then when it comes to virtualized infrastructures like vSphere, snapshots are involved. vSphere snapshots, and from time to time, depending on the virtual machine change rate or depending on the size of this virtual machine, because we're triggering vSphere to create a snapshot to retrieve the data from this snapshot to have a basement of consistency inside. For sure, we'd have other technology that's capable of creating application consistency backup, but the first level of consistency is created through vSphere, because vSphere says, hey, if you want to back it up, just use our snapshots. But vSphere native snapshots, from time to time, it can take some time to commit them, not to leave them behind. And we found how to overcome that, not a problem, but a limitation. That's called backup from storage snapshots. So we can offload the commit operation from vSphere level, commit of a snapshot, to storage level. And storage device, there are a certain set of devices we can integrate with. They can cope with that operation with absolutely no overhead. And thus, backups can run faster and with less pressure.
Absolutely. So basically bringing Veeam snapshot-based backups into production level SQL workloads, for example, for banking applications, or it doesn't have to be in the banking sector, but it's basically high transactional systems that would suffer from latency issues using standard snapshots. So it offloads their capability. It can also be used for DR, can't it, Nikolai? So you can also use storage-based snapshots for your DR replication as well, bringing that to those tier 1 level applications as well. Got one final question from Bobby Moore saying, Azure Site Recovery, does Veeam have interoperability with this, or alternatively, any benefits over using the priority Microsoft tools? So I guess so, but I don't know of personally of interoperability with Azure Site Recovery, but from my personal perspective, it's bringing it back to that 3-2-1 rule myself. It's like if you're using Azure Site Recovery, you're staying within, okay, we're talking 3-2-1 is really for backup and not DR, but you're staying within Azure to Azure with the native Microsoft tools. Whereas I always have a preference of using a different platform for your secondary capability. So
yeah, one thing I'd like to add to that, Richard, is what we see with service providers that are protecting those sort of workloads and where we overlap with ASRM, is that what we tend to find is because they've got the CDP, CDR functionality in it at the moment, which Veeam are about to release. Yeah, the ASRM came from a product called InMarge, if anyone remembers those days. What we tend to find is that they use ASRM for DR and they use Veeam instead of DPM in those tenancies. Yeah. So what will happen? We from a Veeam perspective, we're already having a raft of tenants asking to use Veeam for the CDPR section as well as the backup to reduce the costs of having to use ASRM and Veeam for the backup side of things. So that's what Veeam I think is going to occur, and we're talking a lot with Microsoft guys regarding that.
Fantastic. I think we're going to have to leave it there on the
Yeah,
questions. And Paul, can we?
Yeah, I think we're going to move on to now because we have just slightly overrun on the time. I think what we might do is actually just email back all those people with those questions with maybe some more complete answers, you know, after the webinar. But at this point, I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Debbie, who's just going to wrap things up for us.
Lovely. So firstly, I just want to say thank you very much to our presenters today, and we hope that you found the session this afternoon a worthwhile investment of your time. You will remember, hopefully, from the invitations that we sent out, that there was an offer that we were putting together for people coming on the call today. And as you can see here, that is probably a combined value of about £1,200 and consists of a free 30-day 1 terabyte Veeam Cloud Connect trial with licenses included as well, and also a 1-day cloud backup design workshop. So basically, one of our experts will get in touch, they'll look at your backup and DR solutions, make some recommendations and provide you with a summary report. That obviously can be done remotely rather than face-to-face. So if you would like to take up that offer, if you've got any other questions, any particular requests that you want addressing, then drop me an email, we can arrange that for you. We've also recorded the session today, so we can share that with you as well as the slides. So other than that, thank you very much. Unless there's anything else, Paul or Richard, you want to add?
No, just want to say thank you very much indeed for your time. Really enjoyed that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.